All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first recorded interview of The Fabric of Culture. Today, I'm welcomed by my guest, Katherine Melchior-Ray, who is a current professor at Berkeley Haas School of Business. Throughout Catherine's career, she has been an executive at companies like Shiseido, Tommy Hilfiger, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, just to name a few. And I can't wait to get into more of her career and background and some of her thoughts on the fashion industry, as well as talk about her brand new book that she just came out with that we're really excited to dive into as well, called Brand Global, Act Local. So, Catherine, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Nick. I'm excited to be here. I didn't realize I was the first.
You are. Yeah, so part guinea pig, part you just have such an amazing experience and loved our initial conversation. So yeah, you are the first person to introduce this to the world.
You're so
Before
sweet. Happy to be here.
Before we get started, I did want to talk about your book, and I know we're going to get into the specifics a little bit, but I know you were really slammed with its promotion and everything last week. How has that been going so far?
Oh my God, it's been amazing. Thank you for asking me. I was just realizing as I'm in my husband's office, because we have a full house here, that I don't have one to hold up. So you're going to have to do the holding up for me.
No
Um,
worries.
but it's great. It's kind of surprising to me. It's been number one on Amazon bestsellers for international business for 4 straight weeks.
Wow, that's
Since I
incredible. So
didn't,
I'm
since it's my
assuming New
first
York
book
Times. Go ahead.
and I wasn't really didn't know what to expect, and it could seem like an obscure topic, international marketing, at least in the United States. I'm so thrilled that people are that interested in it because I think it's a book and a topic whose time has come. That's what I'm learning from the positive reaction is that international is no longer an afterthought as it has been, particularly in the United States, for so many years. That really today brands recognize that learning how to expand internationally is more complex than it may seem.
Absolutely. No, and I can't wait to dive into that more. So yeah, let's get started. Oh, and I guess before that, Amazon bestsellers list. So that means New York Times bestsellers list is probably right around the corner. So very excited
Excellent.
when that hits. Great. So let's start from the beginning. Your career has spanned so many different companies in so many different countries, but you didn't start in retail. So would love to hear a little bit more about what you studied in college and your first job out, which was really interesting to hear about and how that helped you transition into retail.
Yeah. Well, I didn't start out in retail, though I grew up in a retail town. I grew up in San Francisco, and I used to get my jeans at the very first Gap where they sold Levi's, and they sold Levi's by like they do today by stomach, uh, waist width, and length. And I remember it was really helpful for me because I'm very tall. So it was really great to be able to go. I got a 36-inch inseam when I was in high school. So I came from a retail town, but I didn't choose to go into retail. I got very interested in journalism and I thought I wanted to be a journalist. And I was very interested in Japan. So I studied Japanese history, Japanese art and culture, and Japanese language for 3 years in college. And so I went straight to Japan after college. And lo and behold, I got a job doing Japan and journalism. So I worked for a Japanese TV network in Tokyo, Fuji Sankei Communications Group. That's a company, it's a holding company that had TV, newspapers, radio, publishing, events, art museums. I mean, it's a huge conglomerate. And I started as an intern in print because that was what I thought my interest was. But with the language being as difficult as it is, I realized it was much easier to work in television and so I switched over to television and I lived in Japan for 2.5 years right after college in the East, if you could believe it. And then I transferred to New York with the company. And so I continued to make Japanese TV shows that aired in Japan from the United States.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that's awesome. And as somebody who's been to Japan several times over the last 2 years, amazing country. Very jealous that you've got to live in Tokyo off and on for so long. And then what like was it when you were in New York that brought you into retail, or was that did that happen in Tokyo?
No, so In Japan, when I was in New York, we started a show. We had the number one TV show in Japan that was a game show. It's called Naruhodo the World, OIC the World,
Uh-huh.
because the Japanese have insatiable curiosity about a lot of different countries. And so with the same team, we did a sister show called Oh, I Can See the World. and um, and it was all about how we would do stories on great brands. My part was the United States. We had a division in Paris that was working on the European side. And so my job was to find incredible brands from the United States that I thought would appeal to the Japanese. So that meant I had to find brands with great heritage and stories and really high quality. And
Mm,
if I could find the right ones with that kind of combination, I would pitch them to the producer in Tokyo. And if he agreed, then I also did all of the negotiation with the manufacturer on which products we would actually sell, how we would price them, and I would help them do all the export. And sometimes that involved adapting even their product specifications. And I'll give you an example. We were doing a story about firefighters in America, and we were offering American firefighter coats. It was kind of a interesting, authentic take on some of the best emergency response teams in the world. And yet the firefighters' jackets, the stitching of the inseam was not close enough for Japanese specifications. They thought that that would not be as strong as what they were expected. So I had to work with the manufacturer to actually adapt the stitching to be of a higher quality. But through that show, I introduced Coach handbags, which was not in Japan at the time. It was still produced by hand in a factory in Manhattan, believe it or not. But with the history that Coach had, they don't talk about it that much, but Coach has an incredible history in the United States of being carried by a lot of the great American novelists and their families. I think Margot Hemingway used to carry a Coach bag, and it was really kind of an exclusive brand at the time,
uh-huh.
and again, all handmade. And so that was a really great brand to be able to introduce for the first time in Japan on television. And we would sell a limited number of exclusive bags live on national television. So in some ways, it was kind of a precursor to home shopping, but it was live and on national television. So on the number one network. So everybody watched it. And so that's how I learned to market to the Japanese of incredible, authentic storytelling, great quality products, and then being sure that the manufacturer would support that kind of quality for all the products they were selling in Japan. And I would put together the story and report it myself.
Wow, that's a very comprehensive way to have gotten into retail, but also kind of a full circle moment. Recently, Coach has been reporting that their sales have really bolstered among the Gen Z crowd. So, being able to say like, "Hey, this is what Coach looks like," and now it being almost reaccepted and reinvited into the world through a younger population.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that luxury ebbs and flows, right? We're in a moment where it's in a really hard spot. That happens all the time. Having worked for Louis Vuitton and Gucci and Shiseido and the luxury hotels, Park Hyatt and Grand Hyatt, I can tell you that those brands are very used to the fact that it swings back and forth. Today, I think Gen Z is really not so interested in luxury. I think that they're saying, you know what, first of all, it's an economic semi-crisis that we're in, despite the stock market, excuse me, despite the stock market being at all-time highs. But I think, if you look at young people can't buy houses and there's uncertainty about jobs, so a lot in healthcare. And so a lot of people really don't feel comfortable, I think, spending, and they don't really care about spending a lot of money on very exclusive luxury brands. And that gives all the brands just underneath it an opportunity again.
Got it. No, that definitely makes sense. And I can't wait to dive more into the luxury conversation with you in just a bit. But you were at Nike in the 90s, arguably one of the coolest time periods for the company. What was that experience like, and what are your thoughts on their recent struggles around innovation, the Jordan brand kind of being overexposed, and some of their other
Yeah. Well, for me personally, Nike was my first US or non-Japanese large company. I worked for a small women's clothing company in the United States before that, but coming into Nike, everyone was a marketer. So I came in to run women's footwear in the United States. I didn't want to be just a Japan hand, and I wanted to diversify my own career. I was living in Portland, and multiple times someone had said, "Can I introduce you?" And I didn't think it was right, but I finally found the opportunity that looked really good for me because it was running women's footwear and
Mhm.
for the United States. And I had been an athlete in college, and I had been a model in high school. So it was a way for me to be able to put a lot of myself into my career, and change the way that people saw female athletes, right? That women could be strong and beautiful at the time. And so it was a really incredible experience in many ways that were good, but also that weren't so good. And I think Nike, like any big company, has a lot of blind spots. I came
Mhm.
into this division, and like any person from the outside, you kind of look at the numbers to see where your strengths are and where your opportunities are in the marketplace. And I quickly saw that at Nike, we had over 90% share of women's basketball market, which was a very small market. The WNBA was just starting, but basketball is still a very small market relative to soccer, cross training, running, volleyball, even
Mhm.
cheer, which at the time wasn't considered necessarily a sport. And so, I kept saying, well, we need to get into some of these other categories in a much larger way. In fact, I was saying, what about walking? And everyone would say, walking? We're not going to get into walking. Like, oh, walking is a sport. And
Exactly.
amongst this target audience, it's a very competitive sport. So I saw these blind spots because that was the era at Nike, and you're not going to believe this, where literally they would say for a women's shoe, shrink it and pink it. I mean,
Wow.
I cringe when I figure out that because it's just so tone deaf,
Of course.
and then the stuff that followed with the Me Too movement at Nike. I mean, there was definitely the women's business and women employees have never, I think, been treated really on the same level as men's sports and as male employees. And I still live in Portland when I'm in the United States, and I think there's still a huge frustration, despite the fact that the women's business has grown to be a really huge part of their business. So you're asking me, what do I think about the current struggles at Nike? And yeah, they're real. I mean, Nike has lost so much of its share price over the past several years. I think it was really good that Elliot Hill came in.
Mhm.
He's an old timer. He really understands the power of the core of the brand, right? It is about athletic performance, and that means they have to really lean into the categories rather than the mass market, which I think his predecessor had done. And so that takes a while to change the ship around, because it's a very large organization. But he knows in his bones where it needs to go. He's been changing out a lot of the executive team, reorienting it. And yet you have some legacy issues of people really wanting to be everything to everyone. Of course, at the size that Nike is, it can't afford to be just an exclusive player, but it still needs to focus from as a brand on that top of the pyramid in terms of both performance and credibility.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, and I think we see that problem a little too often where companies kind of, rest on their laurels and say like, "Oh, like we are who we are." And I think, without that kind of refocusing and reshifting and really listening to the customer and really what they want, you have the issue that they're in today. So, fingers crossed that they're able to kind of hurdle that soon.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, again, I have a lot of confidence in Elliot, and there are a lot of really strong people there and around it. And, when you're in Portland, like there's a lot of Nike people who all wanted to do well and are available to help if need be, rewrite the ship. But he has everything he needs.
got it.
It's just going
Got
to
it.
take some time.
Right. No, it totally makes sense. So then, after Nike, you became a VP of marketing at Louis Vuitton, arguably one of my personal favorite luxury brands. At the time, how would you categorize the Japanese customer in the early 2000s? Well, and then on top of that, what were some of the major launches and partnerships that you were a part of?
Yeah. The story of how I got to Louis Vuitton is really funny, and I will eventually tell it in a memoir. You're talking about my marketing book here, which is the first one to be published, but I have a whole memoir of how I became head of marketing in three different countries, in France, US, actually Berlin, four different countries, including the United States, in five different industries. So between Nike and Louis Vuitton, I was hired by Nordstrom and they sent me to the south of France. So I was in France and I'd been working for 4 years when Nordstrom bought a French brand, Façonnable, when I met Yves Carcel, the CEO of Louis
Hmm.
Vuitton at the time. So Japan at the time was the largest market for Louis Vuitton. Not only was it the largest market, it was the most profitable market. So it was highly dependent on it, kind of how it's now a much more balanced portfolio between Europe, Asia, including China and the United States. But it would be imagined that it was, the US was a much smaller market at the time. China was almost non-existent. And so really all of the international and the most profitable sales were coming out of Japan. So it was an extremely important market, but it was shifting. There was a luxury had lost its luster, if you will. People were getting tired of the same old logos just being pushed out at them by the luxury brands. And Louis Vuitton was more than twice the size of its largest competitor there. So
Wow.
it really owned the market. It's a big market. I mean, it's about a third the size of the United States, but it's at one point in the target demographic of women from 25 to 45, it was like um, more than one out of two women had Louis Vuitton bags. I mean, it was just incredible. So when that market start to hit speed bumps, while I was auspiciously meeting the CEO for a job in Paris, he understood I spoke Japanese. And he insisted that I completely change my idea and move and uproot my family from the south of France, where we were living for Nordstrom, to Tokyo, which I did. I kind of thought if I'm going to go and work for Louis Vuitton, I should really work in Japan, where it's just such a dominant player. And if I'm going to go to Japan, I really should work for Louis Vuitton because it's such a dominant player. But it was a challenging market. Luckily, in this case, I was neither French nor Japanese. And that was really an interesting situation because obviously when I had been at Nike, I was a woman arguing for us to understand a women's market. When I was working for Nordstrom in France, the French saw me as an American and, was I a spy or was I going to water down the brand as Americans do? And I actually
Yeah.
wasn't. I was really straddling the roles between headquarters and France. And I hadn't worked for Nordstrom as an employee before I got on the plane to France. So I had felt that I was impartial, but you can't always affect that perception. So in this case, I was clearly kind of a Switzerland between the French and the Japanese. And I leaned into understanding what was going on with the market. This is where my studying the Japanese history and culture in college really came in. I had a passion beyond just the business cycle about the culture. So I was fascinated to understand how the market dynamics and consumer sentiment had been evolving since their post-war boom, which I had experienced in the TV network. And it was really hard for the brand that was used to just whatever they sold, if it had a logo on it, it would sell well. And now we had to be much more careful, much more discerning, much more understanding, leaning much more into what the consumer wanted. And so it was kind of it was a challenging time, but because it was such an important market, was I had a lot of access. I had access to the CEO, Antoine Arnaud, who is now responsible for all of the creative around all of the brands. He was just coming into Vuitton to manage advertising. Pietro Beccari, who's today's CEO, had just come aboard. In fact, we took him around Japan when he came in. not knowing he'd be the eventual CEO. But so he's kind of from that era as well. So there was a lot going on, and we did all kinds of partnerships. Marc Jacobs was the artistic director at the time, and Marc Jacobs brought this real downtown. I think he was such a great choice by Yves Carcel, the CEO, because he brought this kind of uptown brand downtown, and he created this dynamic tension of being embracing opposites in many ways. You can be very chic and you can be very cool, right? That chic and cool could coexist.
Yep.
So we started working with Nigo and Farrell at the time. And we were doing all these partnerships, and we were doing partnerships also in Japan with Murakami. That was the first time of the whole Murakami collaboration, and working with artists in that way. So you can see the seeds of where the brand is today based on that period. And it was really because the market was changing and we had to stay ahead of it. We needed to be much more innovative than what we had done before.
Got it. Got it. And obviously, it was already big then, but like Louis Vuitton is now LVMH, which is this massive conglomerate. And it's interesting you brought up Marc Jacobs because now there are rumors that they're seeking a sale. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's a good move to spin that off into another entity, or like how do you think about it in terms of Marc Jacobs as the business?
Well, when I say Marc Jacobs came in, he came in as the art director for Louis Vuitton, and he had always his separate line. So he always had his separate line. We didn't get involved in that.
Got it.
Louis LVMH has their sort of jewel brands, Louis Vuitton and Dior, of course. And then beyond some of the top ones, Celine and Loewe, they have lots and lots of other brands. And the small indie designer brands, they appeal to a smaller niche group. They're not responsible for a lot of business.
Yeah.
So honestly, the top execs don't spend that much time focused on it, but people are. There are people dedicated to obviously every single brand that are focused on it, just like people are focused on the bigger brands. And so, I mean, I'm not surprised. I think, Bernard Arnault is really very good at managing his portfolio. He's excellent. He is one of, I think, the best leaders of portfolio brands in this space to acquire brands successfully.
Got it. And that's saying a
So
lot.
he has a program, right? He brings them in. He spends enormous amounts of money. He'd wanted Tiffany's for a long time, and look at what he's done with it. It's really very impressive. America, it went through several different rounds of ownership, and no one could really do what he has been able to do. And you have to invest a lot of money and take risks.
Yeah, and now Tiffany's is opening, their largest flagship ironically enough, in Japan, that just opened, I think, a couple weeks ago. So no, it's been pretty incredible to see that growth. Moving forward a little bit in your career, you eventually landed as a VP at Shiseido. And obviously, some people think beauty is its own category. Other people think, it kind of folds really well into the fashion conversation. But the past month or so, everybody's been talking about the Rhode acquisition and how, it's $1 billion valuation at a 5x multiple, or $1 billion price tag at a 5x multiple, significantly higher than most beauty brands, especially in the current market. So, how do you feel about, I guess, celebrity owned and driven brands and what the future evaluations look like in the space moving forward?
I personally am not a huge fan of celebrity driven brands. I think it's a shortcut.
Hmm.
I'm a brand builder. I like building brands, and sure, celebrities help you get there faster. But if you're a brand builder, you're putting everything into one person's personality. So, um, from a business perspective, clearly it sells. So I'm not going to complain about it too much. But I do think that it's a shortcut, and you're so dependent on that person. And we've seen what happens when brands get very dependent on one person. And you don't have a lot to work with. They have to build all of that up. Now, that being said, their 5x evaluation, while it's high, it's not the highest. I mean, I was at Shiseido, and Shiseido bought Bare Minerals. um, which they bought for $1.7 billion. And many years later, they sold that along with Laura Mercer and Buxom for only, I think, 700 million.
Yeah.
So some companies are, it's actually what I was talking about with Bernard Arnault, is he's very good at acquisitions. Not not all companies are really good at acquisition. So, I mean, we'll see. But I'll say, Tarang Amin is an incredible business person. It's really an incredible business person. I really like Elf Cosmetics. I think he's brilliant. I think he manages it with an incredible heart and soul and financial acumen. He takes great risks, but he puts in really good people and lets them go and do their thing. So he doesn't micromanage, and they have a portfolio of lots of different brands. So, I mean, I'm hopeful because I really like how he leads his business and has lots of different opportunities. But we'll see what happens in the long term, whether he can actually deliver some ROI on that enormous investment.
Absolutely. And to your point earlier, it's also really difficult for, I would say, the average, and when I say average, just like somebody who doesn't have celebrity status, the average entrepreneur who wants to create something really special in that space, like it's hard to not only comp your brand, when you get to that level and you're potentially thinking about an acquisition, but even as you're building the brand, like you're gonna have to break through a lot more doors and break through walls, whereas Haley Bieber didn't have necessarily those issues, right? Not to say
Right.
that like she wasn't deserving of the full price, or like those partnerships weren't great, but getting into Sephora is not an easy feat, especially not only getting in, but like getting the right shelf space with all the different products and brands that they have to cater to. So yeah, it's also kind of hard to kind of look up and say like, oh, like I want to have an acquisition very similar to this, when so many other factors in the life cycle of your brand are not going to be similar to that at all.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair for the average brand to compare themselves to that kind of valuation, but I think what you can learn for it is I do think that the Rhode brand is in the right place at the right time.
Mhm.
Accessible cosmetics with an attitude. It's very Gen Z. I mean, it's really very Gen Z. As we were just saying, Coach has this opportunity as the traditional flagship luxury brands are taking a hit. And that's great. We're in a world that is much larger, more diverse, and we have many more choices. So I like seeing people not feel beholden to cough up this much money for a certain brand. Now, if they love it and they're passionate about it, great. That brand will deliver in spades to them emotionally if they know they really want it. But look beyond the traditional brands and find ones whose brand values and ethos and actions are ones that you really believe in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Totally agree. Shifting gears slightly, our conversation about the luxury slowdown, how luxury brands are really struggling on multiple fronts. Your career led you to becoming an executive at Hyatt. And, we've seen the merging of, really interesting brands and hospitality properties and all of these experiential events, everything from Eden Rock, the tennis court takeovers, to like the simple things as like the lawn chair and beach activations, but then also touching a little bit on that resort core. So when you were there, would you have known, or could you predict that this was kind of going to be the eventual evolution of
Sure,
these kind of brands?
absolutely, yeah. I mean, I didn't just go to hospitality by chance.
Got it. Okay.
I had been in luxury brands for a half dozen years. I saw that. I saw two things. One is the luxury brand employees themselves couldn't organize an event if you delivered it on a luxury platter. They
Mhm.
are disorganized. They're very creative, great ideas, wonderful at mixing different kinds of people and pushing the limit on creativity. But in terms of the detail of the organization, pathetic. So
Interesting.
we worked with hotels all the time to put together our events because hotels are excellent at bringing in, being able to like get 100 people into 100 taxis in 100 seconds practically. So they're very, very good at it. And the second part is that I had just been living all around the world with my family. And I realized that the world doesn't really need yet another luxury citadel in place of, a beautiful river in some remote location. But the experiences really changed people's perspective on the world. And that was the case for me and my family. And so I decided to come back to the United States for my children's schooling, and Hyatt came to me and asked if I knew of the Park Hyatt Hotel, which I had worked with a lot, and the Grand Hyatt Hotel. That was the era of Park Hyatt Tokyo. I mean, I had been a customer of the Park Hyatt Tokyo Hotel for over 10 years already. When Lost in Translation came out with Sofia Coppola, I mean, I knew that life that had been mine in some ways, not as distorted, but I mean, I kind of understood that underbelly of Tokyo. And so, it's the same customer. It's the same customer who is appreciating the luxury hotels and appreciating the luxury products. And when we were doing events for Louis Vuitton or for Gucci, we were moving beyond just getting the runway handbags to, if you are a really important customer of VVIC, we will actually take you to the fashion shows or to the family home in Agnières for a special meal and to see how the products are made, or some kinds of things. Or in Milan, we would take you to the Scala Opera House. So there were lots of different things that we were already trying to do for experiences from the luxury brand side. So from the luxury hospitality side, I knew who the market was. And I was realizing that we just needed to figure out how our brands were positioned to be cater in terms of how we ourselves represented those brands in different markets. The role I was asked to do was to come in and set the luxury brands apart for Hyatt. Hyatt is known for, especially in the United States, for the Hyatt Regency, which is a big business hotel. Park Hyatt, if it doesn't even belong with the Hyatt name.
Mm.
It's really a bespoke, understated hotel. And we were opening a Park Hyatt in New York on 57th Street across from Carnegie Hall. And I actually met Cameron Diaz in the Four Seasons as I was doing my competitive benchmarking. And she was like, "What's the Park Hyatt? What's the Park Hyatt?" I'm like, "What's the Park Hyatt? Okay, girlfriend, you haven't been to the Paris Park Hyatt, you haven't been to the Tokyo Park Hyatt, you haven't been to Buenos Aires, that is every year best hotel in the world." Okay, that's okay, but it showed me what I had to do. I
Yep.
had to get people in the United States to understand this incredible and quiet brand, right? It's not flashy. It's not like the Ritz. It's not, the Four Seasons, which is really very similar from place to place to place. The Park Hyatt is really very bespoke from one location to another. And so that was my challenge, and that was my passion as well. So I completely see how those two industries are overlap, and why LVMH is pushing out its Cheval Blanc brand as a hotel experiences, because at the very high end of the brands, experiences you can do over and over and over and over and over. You sell a bag, you hope they keep using it, and it's only, how quickly can you get them to come back into that store? But the experiences are always changing. They're always, always changing. And so it's a challenging market because you don't have, it's a challenging business because you don't have the same layer of profitability. You can't spend as much money on events. In fact, you're always looking for the clients to come in and do the events. That was me in the past. And then I kind of went to the other side. But there was still a lot of low hanging fruit for us to be able to do. And opening the Park Hyatt in New York, creating a campaign that was all about, we actually did a whole campaign where, because it's so private, rather than Mandarin Oriental, that again, to your personality driven marketing, showed all these famous people, and their campaign was she's a fan, he's a fan, just milking people. I used models and I cut off their heads. I didn't want to show their heads. And our whole angle was, we know who you are. We know your likes. We're not going to tell people who you are. We're going to keep your names private. It was a completely different take. And it emanated directly from the chairman of the Hyatt, the chairman and founder of the Hyatt, the Pritzker family, as to why they had started Park Hyatt. And I write about that actually in the book.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure like that resonance is in terms of just anonymity and wanting to go somewhere secluded, not to avoid the fanfare or the press, but then also to be around like other people, whether it was other executives or other celebrities, there also is like that commonality as well. So that was a brilliant strategy.
It worked. It worked. We were able to charge over $1,000 a night at the time, which was a big deal at the time in New York.
Yeah, that no, that's a high price. So I'm glad it worked out. Speaking of your book, would love to get into it. And as a former marketer, I've started reading it, haven't finished it quite yet, but a lot of these stories and parables and things you talk about have always resonated with me because, like, besides my own experiences, being in business school and going through all the different cases of, market entry and something not working out, I think Disney entering Paris is one of my favorite examples, and how the first time it completely flopped because they tried to do a copy and paste. But what was the original inspiration for the book? Was it just, you kind of sat back and said, like, I've seen this reoccurring issue, like I want to write about it. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think, I was actually asked to write a book on global marketing, and they left the topic up to me. So I was trying to think about what is, I think, the most consistently interesting and challenging and rewarding aspect of doing global marketing for someone who's worked across 5 different industries. So I can't be industry specific. I can't just talk about the fashion world or the luxury world. I was in tech, I was CMO at Babel, I was in television, I was in cosmetics. So I had to find something that crossed all industries and yet had that wonderful tension. And, I brought it up at the very beginning of our call when I talked about being at Japanese television and
Hmm.
working with someone who had an incredible story that I wanted to tell, but I needed them sometimes to adapt even the stitching of their products for a different market. Understanding that not all consumers are the same, and that today, to do business internationally, even if you have a website, it doesn't mean you're truly global. In order to be truly global, you have to figure out which aspects of your brand have to be consistent. Those are the universal values because we're all humans. But how those values show up in each culture is different and is unique. And how then the brand takes those universal values and brings them to life differently across culture. And it could be something like product adaptation, either in the craftsmanship of it or in the range of it. Like I opened the book. You probably, if you've read it, this early story about Puma in India, right?
Hmm.
Compared to the behemoths of Nike and Adi, Puma, a small company, goes into this huge market, India, where you think that it would think it didn't have a chance. And it came out with #1 market share by leaning into the market. What is it that the Indians want? And how can we give it to them in a way that is true to our brand? Right. So what did they do? They leaned into their fashion side because Puma has this ability to be a little bit more nimble in fashion. In fact, I teach this case in my class at Berkeley, and I bring down a friend of mine from Nike who's an Indian national, and he ran Nike in India at the time.
Wow.
So the students love talking to him to grill him on how could Nike have missed this opportunity. And he says, you know what? Especially from him, he's an Indian national. He's like, look, I would say we have got to be more relevant here. And, the people back in Beaverton, Oregon would be like, no, 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 this is the Nike brand. We're going to stay with basketball and running. I mean, basketball's not a really big sport in India, but
Right.
cricket is. And Puma also realized it's really hot in India and everyone was wearing flip-flops. So they created sport flip-flops, right? At the time, Nike and Adidas didn't do that. We don't do this, right? It's like
Hmm.
we don't do walking. So I hear all these echoes from the time that I was there, and brands evolve with the market, and luckily they evolve with good leadership. But sometimes you still hear some of the same brand ethoses that continue over time.
Got it. No, totally makes sense. And obviously, like, this is a fairly loaded question in terms of, we could probably talk for a few hours about it, but, you know, brands that are entering a new market, right? I'm sure it's more than just hiring people that are from there that know the industry and doing more than just like a lot of market surveys and research. But what are some of the things that you think are really big blind spots for brands that if they were to implement it, it's not the immediate solve, but it makes that entry significantly easier?
Yeah. The first thing is to get over your own blind spot,
Mm,
meaning don't think it's going to be the same. Just keep an open mind. If you approach a new market with an open mind, you're already over one of the biggest hurdles. I have spent so long with so many brands trying to say, no, 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 that market doesn't behave the same. We can't just sell, trying to think of something like we can't just sell discounted products into like the Japanese market because they don't like things that are not full quality, right? They really will look at a brand askance if they have products that are defective. And so, like, I have an example also in the book about a dented can.
mm-hmm.
In Japan, packaging is really important. If you're buying a can of beans and the can's kind of dented, in the US, we're like, oh, okay, well, maybe people will even notice. Most people really won't. But in Japan, they won't take that can. And they may not even take the brand because they'll think, wow, if they have a dented can, it means they're not really assuring the quality of that product all the way to the marketplace. So that's the level of thoroughness that the Japanese are looking at. So I think first of all, it's starting with an open mindset, recognizing you do not know everything about that market, and the likelihood is you can't sell in a foreign market exactly what you're selling at home. So the next part then is to figure out, try to understand that market, try to understand who is my target in that audience. I talk about a framework in the book called the CAGE framework that helps you evaluate what are most likely challenges between your home market and a target foreign market. Are they cultural, administrative, economic, or geographic? And depending on what kind of business you're in and where that target market is, your company will fall into one of those four categories that also starts to help narrow down where the differences are. So then trying to really understand that audience and understand what it is they will like and what it is they won't like. Do you need to adapt your product or your service or your communication or all of them? So being open to how you might need to adapt your product you can do it yourself if you want. You can also hire experts that will help speed you up into getting into a market. And depending on what industry you're in, you can also have a sidecar strategy or an acquisition strategy to get into a market faster. You can partner with someone locally that will help you come into the market quickly. Certainly, if you're online, you can dabble in it to see what kinds of products people will or won't buy, but be open to reading it in a way that is unique for their market.
Got it. No, that totally makes sense. And yeah, I mean, like having an open mind is necessary for even, where the company is based. So you definitely have to do that when you go somewhere else. So that's super interesting. One last question, kind of like basically applying what you just said to the luxury market right now. That's honestly just getting hammered with every earnings call that comes out. I was actually just listening to Kering's earnings call a few hours
Oh,
ago.
so sad.
Gucci's
25% loss
yeah,
year on
Gucci,
year.
and
Unbelievable.
it was funny because I actually thought about you when I saw how bad Gucci's sales were. I was like, oh, I know Catherine is not happy to see that from her former employer, but it's happening everywhere, right? Like LVMH's clothing is not doing well, but it's kind of getting propped up by jewelry and leather goods. Prada releases their H1 earnings, I believe, on Thursday, so we'll see how they're doing. I'm assuming Miu Miu is probably going to be propping them up as well. But and nothing is a one size fits all because these are all very different brands with a very different ethos that are going to market in very different ways. But what are some of the things that luxury brands should be thinking about, not only to weather the storm, but when the market finishes correcting itself, to be able to really be a market leader in this environment?
Yeah. Well, I think that true luxury is about honoring your values. Are you about quality and are you about craftsmanship and are you about creativity? So I think, for instance, one of the things that I think you have to really stay true to your values. And I have a framework you're not at the yet if you're just starting the book called the brand fulcrum. And I think it's incredibly appropriate today because it's about how does a brand balance seemingly opposing values like tradition and innovation, classic and edgy. You have to be able to do both, right? Because that allows you to appeal to more people and be relevant to more people. And when a brand is askew in their balance, they've gotten overly classic or overly innovative and edgy, and they're losing the consumer, that fulcrum's out of whack. And when that fulcrum's out of whack, it means that the brand is out of balance. So
Mhm.
trying to really find the right place. For every brand, it's different where it is upon that continuum and what those two seemingly opposing but complementary values should be is all about knowing where you're positioned in terms of you versus your competitors, which may change from market to market. You know, you'll have global competitors, but then you'll have local competitors. A brand that I think this whole quiet luxury is a wonderful evolution.
Mhm.
And again, it's not necessarily price point driven, but it can be. You know, I think the row is amazing. I mean, you know, Mary Kate and Ashley, who would have ever thought, right? It's kind of America's answer to Loro Piano and Phoebe Philo, Celine, and the fact that you know, they've gotten this huge investment of, I think it was $1 billion from the Chanel and L'Oreal families from Europe, really
Mhm.
shows that they're onto something. And you don't see them preening. So this is the opposite example of a personality driven brand, right? You have these two very famous sisters who created this, but you don't see them preening all the time in their product. No, they're behind the scenes doing the hard work. They're doing the hard work. They're monitoring quality. They're making sure it's something that they themselves would buy. And they have a very wide price point. You know,
Mhm.
you can buy the $2,000 cashmere sweaters, but you can also find things that are, you know, under $600. And they have a very, very consistent line. So I'm a big fan of theirs as an example of quiet luxury, staying true to your values and allowing those to evolve over time.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Catherine, again, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate you joining. And for those who are watching slash listening, please go check out our book. It's available on Amazon again, called Brand Globally, Adapt Local. And
You have
again,
it?
thank
Do you have it there?
you. Yeah, we can show it one more time.
There we go. Yeah.
Again, haven't finished it yet, but amazing book from two amazing authors. So please go check it out and buy it whenever you have a chance. And again, Catherine, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick. It's been a pleasure to have you. I love the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks again.